Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions every Monday from 9 to 10 o'clock. We talk about things that affect you in your condo and HOA. Issues that you may have to deal with, whether it's maintenance or it's general discussions about issues that come to play, most of those being legal type things. So if you've got a question or you want to ask about something that's been bugging you in your condo or HOA, you can give us a call. That's why we're here. We've been doing it for about 16 years or so, and as an effort to just help those of you that are new to the condo world, or maybe even those of you that have been around for a while, deal with some of the problems you have to deal with on a regular basis. So feel free to call us, 220-9788, 220-WSTU. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a local CPA and a licensed community association manager, and have a CPA firm in town here, Mark Breckbill PLLC, that deals with condos and HOAs and some of that kind of thing. And the person that you call to hear is the other person that's involved with the show, Peter Mullengarden. Peter is our attorney, and he's been doing this type of work for some 40 years or so, 35, somewhere in that range, since he was a little kid. And he's been helping associations deal with their legal issues for a long, long time in a very, very professional and knowledgeable manner. And if you haven't had an opportunity to work with Peter, you should give him a call, because he's done a great job for his clients and done a great job for this show over the 16 years, and we appreciate it. So good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good, good. I want to mention, too, just as we always do, that we do try to give you the best answer possible, and we try to give you an answer. We don't give you just a ton of different alternatives, because that doesn't help a lot of times, unless there are a ton of different alternatives. But what we try to do is give you the best answer we possibly can, but we don't have your documents, so that limits our ability to give you an exact answer, because your documents can change the answer. So what we'll try to do is give you the best answer we can based on the law and based on your interpretation of your documents and on some of the other facts that you give us. But recognizing that if you need an answer that you're going to go to court for or need to stand to hold up legally, you probably need to contact somebody like Peter and sit down with them and go over and let them look at your documents and give you an answer that's specific to your association. Because like we say on the show here, the best we can give you is a radio answer, because we're not engaged by you, we don't have your documents, and we don't have the information that we need to be able to give you an answer that can tell you whether it would hold up in court. Which Peter has a huge background on, knows the laws and the court cases and all of those kind of things. So some of the things that you'll get from the show in the morning is if there is something that's been to the courts and has been looked at one way or another, Peter usually has that right at his fingertips. So anyway, so feel free to call 220-9788, 220-WSTU, and we'll be happy to get you on. We don't need your association name. In fact, we probably prefer we don't, but we do need your name so that we have something to call you. It doesn't have to be your actual name. We don't have caller ID, so all we do is need something to call you other than, hey, Google, or whatever it is that we're saying now to our little electronic devices. Anyway, so feel free to call. Peter, until we get a call, and by the way, listeners, if there's anybody out there who wants to call and it's not on the subject, feel free to just call us. We're here to answer your questions. So we're going to talk about a number of topics. If we're still answering a question from a previous caller, certainly we're going to finish up with them and get their answer. And we do tend to broaden the answers a little bit, so it applies to a number of circumstances, if that's appropriate. But again, if you have something that's you want to get an answer for, that's why we're here. So feel free to interrupt us. So in the interim, Peter, I thought I would. I've got a situation coming up where I've been asked to count. It's kind of like the Oscars or the Academy Awards or something. I'm Price Waterhouse. I get to count the votes. It's really cool. So we got an election, and by the way, that's sometimes associations, it's happened periodically. Associations will request that they have somebody come in and assist with their election. Typically, it's the county, having somebody count. And maybe it's because they don't have the personnel. Maybe it's because they want somebody outside of the members to do the counting. Sometimes they want an independent party or to do the counting. I've had it a couple times where we've been asked to do that. And of course, attorneys, they're asked periodically to monitor elections or to run elections, I should say. And then from time to time, the state's brought in and they're requested to monitor an election, and they'll bring their people in for that purpose. So I thought, Peter, since that's the situation that I'm going to be faced with later this week, I'd just instead of going back and looking it up, because I'm lazy, I thought I'd just get you to tell me the answers. So this morning, Peter, I thought we'd talk about elections.
Mm-hmm. And who counts, or
yeah, and HOAs and all that kind of stuff, and no, just in general, some elections information. It was, one of the things that that is, and I don't think it has anything to do with this, but particular election, because I don't know much about this other than I'm going to be counting, but a lot of times there are issues with when you're doing a count at a meeting. Maybe you have a large number of votes. It's going to take a long time. Maybe they do change their mind and decide they want to get a count team of people that are independent. And so, kind of what's the requirements if let's say you're in the midst of a meeting and it's obvious that the election is going to be difficult. Like, for example, this town of Indiantown, village of Indiantown out there, I think they took 6 ballots to go through theirs. That's a little different story, but so let's say you're let's start with an HOA. Let's say you're in a homeowners association. Well, let's start with a condo because it's more defined. Let's say you're in a condo association and you're doing an election. Give us a little bit of background in terms of what that process is and what you can and can't do, and votes from the floor, no votes from the floor, and changing votes, and also just in general, what if you want to extend the meeting, or what if you're going to continue it, and can you still accept votes? Some of those kind of things.
Okay. Well, it's as we discussed on the year before, condominiums are highly, highly regulated by statute with respect to the election process. Okay, in that you really don't. Follow your bylaws if your bylaws diverge from what the Condominium Act, and the Administrative Code provides. You just follow the statute. And if you're a very small condo, less than 10 units or 10 units or less, you can opt out. But for the most part, the condominiums follow Chapter 718 and the rules of the Florida Administrative Code with respect to their elections. And it is, very regimented in terms of the actual balloting. Okay, we can go through the whole first notice, second notice, nomination process, but there are no nominations from the floor. All the nominations are done beforehand by a certain deadline, which is not less than 40 days before the election. You have to submit your name in writing, assuming you're an eligible candidate. And the ballots list all the candidates by alphabetical name, by alphabetical order, by last name. You can't indicate who's an incumbent. You can't indicate anything in the election materials sent out by the association.
Peter, just on that question, the thought just came. What does it have to be legal name, or the name you're known by there?
It's funny. It just says surname. It says alphabetical order by surname.
That's interesting.
Last name.
Yeah. So okay. Because it's a lot of times. For example, I know some attorneys that do some of this type of work, and they don't want anybody to know that they're now they're never going to be on a ballot because they're smarter than that. But they don't want anybody to know that they're in the association, and so from time to time they use.
I think you're going to have to use your real last name.
Okay.
Okay. Especially if your documents require
certification.
No. If your documents require all the candidates must be owners. Okay.
All right.
And also, I just think that the statute says surname. Surname, I'm assuming, is your name. Not some nickname. That's never come up. So I'm going to go by the actual person's last name.
Okay.
So all the ballots go out. Now, in terms of who does the actual counting, and we'll start with condos. For the condominiums, there's a committee that is appointed by the board. It's no officers, no directors, no candidates, no spouse of an officer, director, or a candidate. And this, what's known as the Impartial Committee, this Impartial Committee will verify the ballots when they come back. In other words, verify that the outer envelope is signed by the voting member or the authorized person that cast a vote for that unit. They check it off against a list of voters. Anyone that's not signed by the owner or the authorized person to cast a vote for that unit is marked disregarded and put to the side. It's not opened. It's just that particular ballot envelope is put to the side. Now, there's no proxy voting in the election for a condominium association. All the ballots have to be cast by the owners, either hand-delivered, mailed, whatever. Once your ballot is received, it cannot be changed, it cannot be rescinded. So if you change your mind, or you find out something, but you've already cast your ballot, you can't ask for it back. Once it's in, it's in. Now, this Impartial Committee, after they checked in all the ballots, and by the way, they have to do that check-in procedure in front of the membership. So usually it's done at the meeting itself. It can be done on the same day as the meeting, but earlier in the day, as long as you post notice 48 hours in advance, just like a board meeting, that the committee is meeting to verify the ballots. So owners have the opportunity to basically attend and watch the committee do their thing with the ballot envelopes. Once all the ballot envelopes have been collected and checked and verified, then the same committee, starts opening the outer envelopes and separating the inner envelopes from the outer envelopes, and this is obviously to ensure the secrecy of the ballots. You don't know which ballot goes with which outer envelope. Once they start opening those outer envelopes, the polls are closed. So that's by law, operation of law, when the polls are closed and they can't accept any more votes, any more ballots. And then the process, obviously, from that point is after all the envelopes are separated, then you open up the inner envelopes, take out the ballots, and count. And whoever gets the most votes, it's a plurality, not a majority. So if it's 100 units, you don't need 51 votes. You need a plurality of the votes cast. The other thing that's interesting with the condominiums is that there's no quorum requirement to have an election. When I say quorum requirement, typically for an annual meeting or a special members meeting, you have to have a quorum of the members to have a meeting. The quorum typically is a majority, but it could be less, depending on the bylaws. But for purposes of an election for a condominium, it's just 20% of the eligible voters casting a ballot. So as long as 20% of the eligible voters in the condominium association cast a ballot, that is a valid election. So you don't need a quorum per se of the owners to be participating or to be in attendance to have an election. And
if there's multiple candidates and multiple positions open, it's just the highest vote getters, right?
When you say like multiple positions, you mean like if you have like 5 people running for 3 spots? Or
if you got 5 people running for 3 spots, right, something like that.
Yeah, so 3, who gets the highest votes? Okay, if there's a tie, then, and assuming neither one drops out, Then you have a runoff election. Not then. What happens in that case is there will be a runoff election held relatively shortly after that election. The only people, same process, but the only ones on the ballot will be those that were involved in the tie vote. Their information sheets or their resumes, whatever you want to call them, assuming they submitted one, are included in that runoff election, and that would happen in the event of a tie.
And now, if you have a runoff election, do you have to go through that whole process again for just those two candidates if it's a condo, or
yes?
So the whole thing, the information sheets, the whole deal, the notification,
the whole deal, just like the regular election. Okay, you mail out a notice of a meeting. You mail out a ballot just with those candidates listed. The ones that were in the tie. You include their information sheets. So it's basically the same process. It's two envelopes. The same process. It's just between the runoff candidates.
Now, does the board? Let's say that you've got five candidates or five positions open, multiple candidates, and so at this point, four candidates are obviously elected. So you've got them, and now you're having a runoff with for the final spot. Can the board that has just been seated, can they appoint a director on an interim basis?
No.
Okay, so they're going to be without a director for potentially another month and a half or so.
Well, yeah. Well, that election has to be held. I think it's within 30 or 21 days. I'm getting brain lock, but
yeah. But didn't you say you have to go through the process again?
But you don't. Yeah, but you don't. Yeah, you do have to go through the process again. But you're right. That seat will stay vacant until it's filled by the runoff election.
Okay.
Correct.
But you don't have to go through that 40-day turn in your name.
No.
Okay, yeah.
No, you're not renominating.
Okay, so it's just
you're only going through the second notice provision.
Okay, second notice. Okay, so
you're
basically less than 30 days, most likely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right, that's right. All right, then. That's what I wasn't sure about, whether you had to go through that whole distribute the information sheet again and, all of that kind of stuff that's got to go out there.
Well, you do. I mean, the information sheet is included with that second notice.
With the second notice, yeah.
But you're not soliciting nominees again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're not doing a first notice again because you already, that's superfluous.
Okay.
You're just doing the actual election for those that are in the runoff. So you got a ballot, you got the information sheets for those. They don't change their information sheets; it's the same ones they submitted before.
Well, now that's my other question. Can they change them?
No.
Okay. So if there was
if
something
they didn't turn one in before, they don't turn one in now. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, but if for example there was something
on
the election,
if they did turn one in before, you have to include it again with this runoff package.
But no modification to it.
No.
Okay, that's clear. Okay, then. Yeah, because that's what I was wondering, because, if you had an election and maybe it hinged on an issue, maybe the person wanted to clarify their position on the issue. They can't do that.
No, they can go on their own and do that.
Yeah.
Okay, it's, if they want to do their own campaigning and their own mail-out or their own knocking on door or whatever they want to do, but in terms of the official mailing from the association, it's the exact information sheet that was submitted originally.
Okay. All right, and that's got to be that second notice has to go out. What is it? No less than 14 days, no more.
Yes.
And no more than 21.
Yeah, for a regular election. For the runoff election, it's a little shorter than that.
Okay.
But for the regular election, it's the second notice with the ballots and the ballot envelopes and everything is not less than 14 days before the election.
Okay.
Now, if you do want to as far as monitoring, since you did mention it. Okay.
Right.
Now, the Ombudsman's office will provide an election monitor. Okay, if 15% of the owners or more petition, that they want a monitor for the election. The association has to pay for the monitor. Okay, and then the Ombudsman's office will appoint a monitor to go and actually run the election. In essence, I've seen a couple of them, and they pretty much just take over and they just run it. And then the Ombudsman's office will do the election.
Now, does any of this stuff change if it's a turnover audit? I mean, turnover meeting?
No.
Okay. All right. I didn't
No,
think
the
so.
process is the same.
Okay.
Except for who the developer may be able to vote for, or something like that. But
Yeah.
other than it's the same. It's the same. It's the same process.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, that's pretty much how the how the condominium election works. It's
Okay.
Again, it's pretty straightforward. You just it's pretty much following the statute.
Now, what about HOAs? That's
Well,
more
HOAs
shooting from the hip, right?
is completely different.
Okay.
Completely different because whereas the condominium election is completely driven by the statute, in a homeowner association, it's completely driven by your bylaws or your governing documents, actually,
Right.
which can be the declaration, bylaws, articles, and rules. In an HOA, yeah, the procedure is per your bylaws, and so therefore, you may have, in fact, you probably will have proxy voting unless your bylaws have been amended, or maybe were written fairly recently where they did not have a proxy vote for an election. So the first thing you got to do with an HOA is what is the election procedure set forth in your documents, okay, and then you follow that. So whether it's a nominating committee, you also are required to allow to have nominations from the floor, unless your election procedure provides for the owners having the opportunity to pre-nominate themselves, a la like a condo. Okay.
Okay.
And in that case, you're not required to have nominations from the floor.
Okay.
And if your bylaws provide for absentee secret balloting, again, if it's in your bylaws, then you use it. Under the statute, you are required to use a 2-envelope system similar to the condo system.
Okay.
Where the outer envelope is signed by the owner and inner envelope has the ballot. And those, that's the major distinction between the two. By the way, going back just quickly for the condo runoff, it is done relatively quickly because within 7 days after you do the election, you are required to send out the notice of the runoff election, and that election must be held within 21 days of the date that the tie occurred. So the runoff election will be held in 3 weeks or less.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. So you got 14 days. Basically, it's still the 14-day
14-day notice, but it goes out 7 days later.
Right. Right. Yep.
Again, HOAs, going back to that, it's really look to your bylaws. You may have nominations from the floor. Probably will, again, depending on what the election procedure is. Proxy voting, most likely, again, unless your bylaws say no for the election process. One thing that you do have to recall, or you do have to remember with respect to HOAs, remember I said that in a condo, you don't need a quorum because by law, it's only 20% of the owners voting. Well, in an HOA, you will need a quorum, which, by the way, is 30% of the owners represented at the meeting, in person or by proxy, unless your documents provide for a lower quorum. So you will need a quorum unless your bylaw procedure or your procedure in your governing documents provide for an election where you don't need that quorum, and maybe they've written the bylaws to copy or parallel the condo law to a degree. But if they haven't been, then you will need a quorum to conduct the election.
So let's say that you've got proxy ballots. So that you have the meeting, you're at the meeting, you've got the proxy ballots cast, you've got all of this other stuff, all of those are in there, and then there's some question about the validity of the count, which is kind of the situation I'm going to be looking at, I think.
Well, okay. I mean, basically, you mean what? Someone is going to be later on saying, "I think there was some shenanigans going on, or something happened," or
well, no,
whatever?
I think at the meeting, they couldn't, for whatever reason, couldn't come up with a valid count, and it was affecting the election, and so they basically have had the attorney has captured the ballots, and I'm going to be counting those ballots.
Well, I'm not sure what happened because presumably, I mean, there's you do make a count, and the counts count. I mean, some people might think it's it's messed up or whatever word you want to use, or there was some impropriety or some something was done incorrectly, but presumably whatever system was in place, either through the committee or whatever, there was a count, there was some result announced or made, presumably. I don't know. What the law provides is, all the election material, whether it's the ballots, proxies, if it's an HOA, inner envelopes, outer envelopes, everything is kept by the association. Anyone has the right to inspect it and has a right to make copies of it, or obtain copies of it. Any challenge to an election, either HOA or condo, must be brought within 60 days of the election itself. So if someone believes that the election was incorrect or the process was incorrect, the outcome, whatever it was, whatever an owner may feel went wrong, he or she has 60 days in which to file something to challenge it. The state handles the election disputes, both for HOAs and for condominiums. They're both done through the Division of Condominiums, Timeshares, and Mobile Homes. And that's in a nutshell the process. So again, with your particular situation, obviously I don't know what's going on. It sounds like maybe they did not even announce a result that night or that day. I don't know.
Right.
Which seems a bit strange. But if anyone wanted to challenge that election, they would have that 60-day period.
Well,
whenever the results are.
Yeah, whenever the results are. So so the question that I have, and then one of the going back to kind of the condo, and I guess it could affect the HOAs. You talked about they have to save the outer ballot, the outer envelopes, and then the ballots themselves and all that. But at that point, if there was a challenge and the question was that all of the people that voted weren't valid unit owners, all right? So now you go through all these outer envelopes and you find one that, we don't know for sure that was a valid. Mm-hmm. So now you've invalidated the whole election, right?
Not necessarily.
Because you can't tell how that person
voted.
Not
necessarily, because, again, the way the law reads is the election will be valid as long as it substantially meets the requirements. There are some fatal flaws that will knock out the entire thing. Okay. If there was there are some flaws that are fatal, not doing a 60-day notice, not including the information sheets, not including someone on the ballot who should have been on the ballot. Okay, I mean there are some flaws that are fatal. Okay, however, if it's not a fatal flaw, then they look for substantial compliance, and if there was an error made, if that was not a fatal error, one of the few fatal errors, then they'll look to see whether that had any impact on the outcome. So in your situation, if maybe one or two ballots were accepted that maybe should not have been accepted, mm-hmm. but would not have made any difference, that election, in my opinion, is not going to be overturned. Okay.
But if the election is being decided by a vote or two,
I said if it wasn't going to affect the outcome, if it was going to affect the outcome, then they probably would require the election to be done over again. Okay. So, but if it was, if it was a 20 or 30 or 40 vote difference, they're not, again, and it wasn't one of those fatal procedural errors, then it's probably not going to make any difference.
Okay. All right. So that's what that makes sense then. And then I know in the condos there's a requirement that it be counted in front of the members, right?
Yeah, all this has to happen in front of the membership. So when I said before, all the verification of the ballot envelopes is done either at the meeting itself or at a committee. The same impartial committee meets earlier in the day, but the meeting is posted so everyone's aware of it and they can go attend and watch the actual counting of the ballots, the opening of the envelopes. The counting is done in front of the owners. The committee cannot retire to some back room out of sight and do it there.
Mm-hmm.
They're required to do it, in the room so people can observe.
So people are going to see me take my shoes off so that when we get to 10, I'm in trouble, right? So they don't know what they got into. I'm trying to figure out what's the appropriate dress for something like this. I was going to put a noose around my neck with the name Chad on me, but
there you go.
I don't think they would like that too much.
Bring your abacus.
Bring my abacus. Yeah, I'll do that. One of those in the CPA world, we used to years and years ago on these big audits that we were doing of these big companies. Big banks and stuff, so you got numbers that go out forever. They had these machines called comptometers, and we had comptometer operators. Now I was 20 at the time. This was in the 70s, and so I'm out there on these big clients, and we didn't have computer programs to do that. And they were going through they were going through lists of printouts, but they were re-verifying the total. So they were doing it by hand, and they bring out this comptometer operator. And usually they were like 95 years old, because nobody knew how to run these things other than somebody that had been doing it for about 40 years. And that was the whole purpose. Better than an abacus, by the way, though, because you could do billions of dollars worth of numbers on the thing, but it was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It was just...
I did misspoke on the runoff. The runoff is held not less than 21 nor more than 30 days after the date of the meeting, after the date of the original election.
Okay. So it's 21 days. So we got
21.
So you
minimum,
got about
it's a minimum 21 days, not more than 30 days from the date of the election.
Now, does the statute affect HOAs too relative to? Okay, so HOAs are going to be strictly document driven, right?
Yes.
All right. So if they don't require that they be counted in front of
the
members,
you probably would do a runoff that night, right there, right then and there.
Yeah, you could do that. Okay. So then, all right. Well, then, and so there wouldn't be any requirement then that they be counted in front of anybody or anything like that necessarily, unless the documents call for it.
Right.
All right. Well, yeah, this is one of those things that's kind of interesting because you and I have talked before as to why. Really, this is one of those things where condos and HOAs could be the same. It causes a lot of confusion because you and I have both seen situations where associations will use the condo format, and because it is a pretty good. I mean, we've all gotten used to it. It's a pretty good format. So you'll get property management companies or people that use the condo format, and it's not in accordance with their documents, Right. So they're
you should not just automatically apply the condominium process,
right? And just because you think, well, that's more, controlled and reasonable and fair, that's okay. But if your documents don't, then modify your documents to say this is one of those kind of things where we tell people that they should, look at modifying their documents, and it's one of the reasons why. There's a difference. We talk about turnovers and things like that and some of the things, and we talk about as an association after you've turned over, you should look at your documents and see if there's provisions in there that you want to change. And again, that's not because the developer was doing anything wrong at all. It's because the developer has written documents which are the best for them for what they're trying to do, which is sell units and keep paying their bills while they're selling units. That's the idea. And so, so from their standpoint, they have a different motivation. Meetings are less formal for them because they don't want to go through the process. So they're not going to write all these notices in there if they don't have to. Because there's no reason to. They can, while it's under developer control, they can walk down the hall typically and call a board meeting. So it's not like they need all of the formality of all of this, because they can only get tripped up on a technicality as a developer. So some of these things, including election procedures, need to be looked at, and things like whether you're going to allow rentals and what kind of rentals and that type of thing. All of those aspects of your homeowners association or your condo association, all of those things need to be looked at after turnover to decide if there's another way that you want to do it. Now, sometimes it may be perfectly fine. You guys might, an association may want less formality. Yeah, sometimes when there's a turnover, there's more conflict because it's a turnover, and there's more requirements, and there's things that have to take place. So that doesn't mean that the next meeting down the road, is not going to be really smooth, because then you're going to be an association managed rather than a developer managed association. You're going to be an association managed association, and of course then, as all of us know, there's no volunteers out there, and you won't get anybody to run. So there'll never be a conflicted election, because whoever puts their name in is going to be the person. So the other thing, we've talked about it before, but just we do like to talk a little bit about some of the expanded thing. Very seldom in an HOA are your documents going to say that the top person is president or that you're running for president. You are not.
You never see that.
Yeah.
Well, I think I've seen it once, actually.
Yeah, and with all of the documents you've seen, that would be obviously a very, very minor portion of the total documents that you've ever looked at in your life. So if you've seen it once, that's not even a statistical blip.
Yeah, because that is, you're right, but that is and we've mentioned this before on the show, but that is a misperception, I guess, or not a huge one, but where people think, the owners think they're voting for president, vice president, whatever, and as you mentioned, the officers are elected 99.99% of the time by the board.
Right.
So the board, after the election, at the organizational meeting, will elect the officers. And
that is why I asked about the appointment process, because technically, especially in a turnover situation, you can't appoint new officers yet because you don't have a board that's seated, and so at that point, or even if you do have a board that's seated, you may not have a plurality, because that one person that may be still not filling the seat is the deciding vote. So you may not be able to appoint officers, which means then to some degree, typically, the previous officers are going to carry over. Because
although their terms also typically are one year though too. So,
but if there's no board to appoint them,
but then your bylaws may require officers to be board members. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Right.
I think if their terms expire, they expire. I would say that they're off.
Yeah.
And usually the organizational meeting is held. You try to hold it quickly.
Right.
Typically, it's held immediately after the annual meeting, but that's a board meeting too. That's required to be noticed.
Right.
So, and
it has to have an agenda.
Also, it's not a secret meeting. I mean, oftentimes I see they go into some back room and do whatever they do. Now, it is the only time that, and this is for condos and HOAs, it is the only time that the directors can vote by secret ballot.
Right.
They are allowed to. Otherwise, it's always a open voice vote. But it is a meeting that's held in front of the membership, to the extent that any members want to attend. And it is a meeting that is required to be noticed, just like any other board meeting. So 48-hour posted notice of the organizational meeting.
And, and keep in mind that there's some confusion there relative to, you talk about votes, voice votes. There are, some people will abstain. You don't have a right to abstain.
Yeah, you do.
Well, I mean, you don't have a right to abstain and not have it count. It's going to count. It's either going to be no or under the statute now, I think it's no, isn't it? If you abstain.
No, that was changed. Now,
okay.
if you abstain, you abstain, and your vote is not counted, for or against.
But and a lot
But
of
you should not. Quite honestly, you're elected to be on the board, and you should vote.
right.
I mean,
Especially for officers, and then the other thing is that we were talking about. There's some confusion. Sometimes people think that the president only votes to break a tie, and that's not true. No,
that's not true.
The president is not voting as the president. They're voting as a director.
Correct.
So the directors have equal authority. Nobody votes to decide, and and as Peter said, it's not a secret ballot, and it's a voice ballot. And so, I mean, it's a.
And you're also supposed to, since we're talking about board voting now, you're also supposed to note in the minutes how every director votes, not just put it passes 4-3,
right,
or it fails 4-3, or 5-2. You're supposed to indicate how every director voted yes, no, or abstention.
And it's not. This is the other thing. Sometimes boards, especially in the homeowners and condo associations, feel that it has to be unanimous. Well, we need a unanimous vote.
No, it doesn't.
Charlie's not in favor of it. So, well, that's not the case.
It's not a jury.
Right. We're not hanging anybody so far. Although, there's probably been some of those.
It's not a jury where if it's one dissonant, that means the resolution fails. Or,
right. Yes. And so
the conviction isn't adopted or whatever.
Right. And it also doesn't mean that it can't be changed.
People are allowed to disagree.
Right.
Okay. So you're right. Most decisions, almost every decision, not every decision, depends on your documents, are made by a board by a majority of a quorum. So assume that you have a quorum, which is a majority of directors, and it's a majority of that to adopt most resolutions, most decisions. And you're right. There's no requirement that it be 7-0 or 5-0 or whatever it, whatever
right.
the board makeup is.
Yeah, and so so just from that standpoint, then it's just good practice to understand some of these things. Last thing I would ask about, Peter, I think we talked about it, but I don't remember the answer. Is there a requirement under the HOAs and the condos under 617? Is there a requirement to have 3 officers, or is that been eliminated? Do you know? Because I know on the regular statute 605 and 607 and the corporate statutes, we're now down to the point that you only have to have 1 officer. It used to be you had to have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer, I think is what the requirements were. But some of those positions could be joint, but you had to have at least 3 originally on the corporate side.
Actually, I think not to mention, I think under 617 there is the requirement for the 3 officers.
I think there. I
believe that's correct.
Yeah, I know you'll look at that, but I know it's one of the things that I believe that's a requirement because we get into the nonprofit world and which is also 617, and I'm almost positive that there's a requirement. I know to get an IRS exemption, I believe your bylaws and that have to have at least 3 officers, and they have to have at least because they're board controlled. HOA, nonprofits are typically don't have members, so they're board controlled. So they want at least 3 officers and board members. But and maybe it's just board members; it may not be officers. But anyway. So it's one of those kind of things where there is a, again, it's based, most of this stuff.
Well, what 617 says, I have to go, it says a corporation shall have the officers described in its articles or bylaws.
Right.
Okay. Does not require a certain number or certain.
Okay.
It defers to your documents.
Okay, good. So that must be, so where I was getting confused, I think, is that I think the tax laws potentially for you to be approved as a 501c3 at least requires that you have 3, only because they don't want a nonprofit controlled by one person, and there's some personal benefit type things, personal inurement. So that must be where I'm getting it mixed up, because I know that for nonprofits it was all three, and I thought it was the same for condos and HOAs, but obviously not. So if your documents say we only have to have one officer or one board member, I guess then that's all you have to have, correct?
Again, most bylaws, 99.999, provide, there should be, these officers. There is no, that I can recall, any requirement, by law.
Right.
How many
now,
you have to have.
One of the things I would mention, though, to people that are thinking, well...
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
Wait, go ahead.
In the absence of a provision to the contrary, this is Condominium Act, this hardly ever comes up. In the absence of any provisions to the contrary, the board shall have a president, secretary, and a treasurer.
Okay.
So in a condominium, unless your bylaws provide otherwise, you have to have a president, secretary, and a treasurer.
Okay.
Again, every association does, so it's not something I ever even look at.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of funny, and usually they're not the same person, So it's not like
you
could have a president.
Depends on your documents too.
Yeah, you could have a president, secretary, and treasurer. They could be the same person. One of the things I would warn, one of the things we try to do on the show is also just let people know that even though you can do something, doesn't mean it's a good idea. And we forget that. We learned that as kids, okay, I could do this, and then it wasn't a good idea. But as adults, we got the same issues. Even though we can do something, doesn't mean it's a good idea. So even though you could have one director potentially, it's not a good idea, because even 617 is designed to protect you as a volunteer. But where it doesn't protect you is if you're getting a personal benefit, specifically a personal benefit out of the transaction. For example, if you're a director and you're taking a vote, there's one director and you're taking a vote on utilizing a subcontractor for your landscaping, and it just so happens that you're an owner of that landscaping company. Well, you know what? No matter how much due diligence you did, and no matter how many of those they did, and how many, you're opening up yourself to some liability on that contract, personally, because of ratifying a related party transaction like that. You're supposed to abstain from voting, but you can't because there's no other directors. So that's what I'm saying. There's issues like that where you could find yourself in a legal bind or some sort of problem just because there wasn't somebody else to sign off on the transaction. From an internal control standpoint, we would go ballistic on something like that as CPAs, because that means that you could execute and sign things by yourself with no other involvement. You could approve stuff with no other involvement. We'd have to look at every single contract, every single transaction that the association got involved in, because of the fact that there'd be nobody looking over your shoulder. So it may seem like a good idea. It may seem like you have to do that because nobody else will step forward. Well, sometimes nobody else will step up. Property managers, good property managers know this. Somebody will step forward when you start talking about going to court, bringing somebody in to manage the association at $150,000 a year, and your assessments are going to go up to $1,000 a month or something. You'll find that people start volunteering at that point, even if it's for a short-term basis. They start volunteering at that point when it hits them that hard in the pocketbook, right, Peter? And that's what we're talking about. When you can't do your job as an association, not as an officer or director, because that's not your fault, but when you can't do that job as an association to elect a valid board, then the alternative is somebody's going to complain. The first time something happens, somebody's going to complain. And then at that point, you're going to be under some sort of statutorily controlled or court-controlled situation. And at that point, they're going to appoint somebody to run the association. That's going to be somebody with a CAM license. It's going to be somebody with a lot of experience, and it's going to be somebody who's taking on a lot of liability because they're now responsible. And so they're going to charge you a lot of money. Even more money than they would charge if they were just coming in to be your property management company. So keep that in mind because it's going to get expensive. But anyway, well, that's kind of election stuff. I know people have gone through it. The last thing I guess we'll end with, because we're running out of time, is, like you said, Peter, if some of this stuff doesn't happen, it doesn't really invalidate all of this except for a few fatal things, right? So if a board is there and they vote on something and turns out later there's a challenge, those laws are still, or those things are still going to be valid, correct?
Yes, most likely. Yes,
most likely. So so just keep that in mind that if you make a mistake, correct it as quickly as you can. But it's, if you're a person out there, it's not a gotcha. Now nothing that you did was valid and we can start over again. That's not going to be the way it's going to be. Most times you're going to be allowed to continue to manage the association and run the association because there are exceptions for that. So, and we can talk about that next week if anybody wants to. We'll be here every Monday, 9 to 10 o'clock on WSTU talking about things that affect you in your condo and HOA. You can always call us at 220-9788. That's 220-WSTU. Keep that number because it's appropriate for some of the other shows. And Peter, as always, thank you for all of the information that you give us. We really appreciate that. And thank you, listeners, for being here on WSTU. We are out here to help you in the community. We are your heritage station, WSTU Digital 1450.